So my name is John Kennedy. What I do is to help people improve their performance regardless of their starting baseline. Neuroplasticity, the amazing capability of our brains to change from stimulation. I got into it kind of through a backdoor way, actually. My background was really process reengineering consulting for really large companies. Did a lot of really good work, rescuing projects, all about improving processes which helped organizations operate more efficiently. My life changed back in 2006 when my brother came back from Iraq and said IEDs, which are the improvised explosive devices that kill so many of our guys, are killing us, can you help? I had this hypothesis, and maybe if it would work, I could help save lives as opposed to just helping businesses make more money. So my hypothesis was to apply a process reengineering methodology, which I developed for businesses, to the brain, and using neuroplasticity, which is this amazing capability of our brains to change, as the medium. Had no idea if it would work. Was able to talk a Marine General Doug Stone, into helping me give me a chance. And I got a contract from the Marines. We were trying to see if we could improve actually intuition, because we figured if the brain was more efficient and we improved intuition, then possibly we could sense danger. This actually came from some research I did out at 29 Palms, which is a Marine training base, where they put us through a whole weekend of trying to teach us as much about IEDs as possible. An immense amount of information, but what struck me the most was the Marines who were guiding us had all survived IED blasts or attacks. And the consistent report from them was, I started to go down this one street or this one alley or enter this one building. Something seemed wrong, so I went a different way and was safe, but the guy behind me went that way and got blown up. Malcolm Gladwell describes this in his book Blink. He calls it thin slicing, where the brain can take data so fast and unconsciously take it to the point where it actually makes a decision and acts on it. That's what we're trying to create. So embedded with a platoon of Marines, 40 guys out of 1,000. I asked for the worst platoon in the battalion as my trainee group, because if we could do anything, I wanted to help these guys. We had a randomly chosen control group. It was overseen by a bunch of psychologists. We did before and after IQ tests from both groups. But I really felt something for these guys. Embedding with Marines was an awesome experience. Some of them are still close friends to me today. And so during those 3 months, I had to develop these exercises that would target executive function, because that was our goal. Because if we can improve executive function and make it faster, since everything relies on executive function, we should be able to make those decisions faster. So 3 months later, we did another IQ test of both groups, and the group I had trained was significantly higher in the IQ test, but more significantly, their performance had improved tremendously. So a lot of these guys had struggled with some post-traumatic stress disorder, some depression. 3 guys had tried to commit suicide. They were really under a lot of stress. They'd lost 16 guys a cycle before. So now 3 months later, the instructor said it was the best performance he'd ever seen. And at their final pre-deployment training in California, back at 29 Palms, at one IED specific course, not only did they find the IED and capture and follow the det cord back to the trigger man, they captured him. The instructor said, leave him alone, go back to patrolling. Nobody ever gets that far, he's out of bounds. They did tremendously well. So from then it kind of spread throughout the military. So one of the commanders from that battalion took over a battalion of Marine Special Operations. So we got into Marine Special Operations. Phenomenal experiences there. Got into the Scout Sniper course, one of the toughest in the military. Traditional dropout rates are 40 to 60% because it's so tough. 2 of the classes with our program, only 1 drop per class, and the highest marksmanship scores of the class. We went then to Special Operations, and technically it's the only program of its kind. It's been vetted by Special Operations Command, where we trained some Navy SEAL instructors in Tampa. Snipers, pilots, both helicopter and fixed wing pilots. So tremendous improvement in the military. Unfortunately, about 8 years ago, military funding got cut, so we moved to the civilian sector. But then it's actually opened up this huge amount of potential. So I'm very fortunate now. The same program at making the brain faster, more focused helps professional athletes. So I work with a number of professional athletes in a number of different sports, high school athletes and college athletes as well. Obviously for student athletes, it also helps them learn better. We did a pilot at an inner city Chicago high school a couple years ago, and ACT scores went up 3 full points after just 8 weeks. With the teacher leading the exercises, it wasn't even me, so I can teach people how to do this. Right now, currently working professional athletes, kids with learning disabilities, people with depression. We've had tremendous success with depression, Parkinson's, even cerebral palsy. So because our brains control almost everything we do, when we can improve the speed of the brain and also the connections to the various parts of the body, tremendous improvements can happen very quickly. So again, our brains change physically from stimulation. And that's actually something important that people need to realize, because if you repeat something over again until it becomes comfortable, that's what's causing that. So we might call that habits. For athletes, we might call it muscle memory, because you're repeating something over and over again. It's really the brain that's changing. That's actually empowering, because it means that we can actually change bad habits. We can change bad performance. It's not, as my daughter's soccer coach used to say, it's not practice that makes perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. And the more that we practice something over and over again in the right way, the better our performance can be. So neuroplasticity is that now at the physical level, there's a lot of different changes that go on, primarily in the area of more connections and more efficient connections. So when the brain works harder, it has to respond by responding to the load, just like your muscles do. 5, 10, 15, pretty soon you can curl a 30-pound weight. The weight feels lighter, not because it is, but because your muscles are stronger. Your brain does the same thing, but instead of increasing muscle fibers, it actually increases what are called postsynaptic receptors. So long technical term, all that means is when neurotransmitters are jumping through your brain, there's buckets on the other side of the gap called the synapse. So if you have 100 buckets and you throw 500 balls at it, you'll catch 100 balls. If you have 200 buckets, you catch 200 balls. And that's what's happening when we make the brain work progressively harder, which our program does. Now, a couple things about that. One, the cool thing is these changes start to solidify in as little as 20 minutes. So very, very fast. The second important aspect of this, though, is this exercises have to be what neuroscientists call robust. Robust stimulation engages as many parts of the brain that are connected to the real world as possible. This is why, believe it or not, digital games like Lumosity, Brain HQ, and so forth, they don't work. You'll get better at the games because you're practicing, but because the interface is so shallow and it's not connected to the real world, study after study shows you get better at the games, but no real world improvement. We want to engage we want real world improvements. And it also makes the brain work harder because there's more connections. So that's the critical part of this. The other part is that we target executive function. Really nothing else. But when you target executive function, using all the parts of your body and your brain, all those connections get faster, and so your performance improves.
And targeting executive function is basically what you're doing to increase intuition because of the ability to input sensory information and output a decision?
You're making decisions faster. So the program is really based on making very, very simple decisions. And in fact, we start a Navy SEAL or a 4th grader with the exact same exercise because the brain works the same. Very, very simple decisions that gradually get harder. And as they get harder, we add more parts of executive function. One very important piece is something we call cognitively primed anticipation. So if you can anticipate what's going to happen before it does, your brain is primed for that. That means that you might not get blown up, right? It means that you might not get in a car accident. It means you might not get your shot blocked. It applies to almost anything because the brain is primed to anticipate something. Pattern recognition is another critical part of executive function. The quicker we can recognize patterns, the sooner we can adjust our own behavior and pick up other people's behavior. Obviously huge for athletes, right? If you can pick up your opponent's patterns quicker or your own, every time you do the same crossover, eventually it's going to get stolen, right? So when you realize that ahead of time, you can make changes. So those are very important. And then working memory. holding something in short-term memory, then executing on it. That's really, really important. So for athletes, whatever you're telling yourself you need to do, you need to hold it in your memory, right, and be able to execute on it without thinking about it. Now, speaking of that, there's a very interesting term that neuroscientists use, shifting conscious processing to unconscious processing. They call it the zombie system, right? Because zombies, they're out to kill you, but they're not thinking about it, right? So zombie system. Think about the first time you learned to drive a car, right? So it's all your mental effort just to keep that car on the road without killing somebody, right? Now you drive a car without thinking about it. It's the same amount of effort, but it's been offloaded to a zombie system. So now your conscious mind is free to look around, talk to the person next to you, and so forth. And that's what we try to create. So, and that's what applies to intuition, because if your body knows what it needs to do instinctively, your conscious mind now is free of stress, it's more focused, and it can think ahead to what it needs to do.
Awesome. What are some myths about brain training, or about the brain, or just about human psychology that a lot of people believe right now that may not actually be true?
Well, a couple of those. One, you've probably heard a lot that we only use 50% of our brain. We actually use all of our brain. But if you don't use it, you'll lose it, right? So connections are constantly changing based on stimulation. So we use our whole brains and both hemispheres and all four lobes of our brain all the time, but if we don't use them, if they fall into disuse, you're going to struggle there. That's one of the things about our program is we engage all four lobes and memory and both hemispheres. So if you see an EEG of someone doing it, you just see like lights throughout the brain all lit up simultaneously, because that's what we want to do. So we do use all of our brain. Another myth around brain training programs, most of them are two different kinds. Some are psychology based, which aren't bad, right? They help you think better, positive self-thought. And the reason they work, again, is neuroplasticity. When you repeat those positive things, visualization is another very powerful way, and kind of the psychological, procedural type brain training, which actually is very effective. As I mentioned before, the digital ones don't. The digital, it's kind of like, the gold mine, right? Or the goose that lays the golden egg. If you can write a program and sell 1 million of them right at once, sell many, you make a fortune, right? So the big push has been to make brain training games digital. The very first real supposedly effective one, the dual N-back, developed by Bushgill and Jaggi. It was interesting because when their first study came out, it took many, many times before they could even duplicate the results, and even then, there was no real-world benefits. Yet all the digital brain teams out there, they all quote the dual N-back. Well, you will get better at the game because you're repeating it, but it doesn't have the real-world improvement. Some other myths are just even like, it's not necessarily a myth. Sudoku is a good way to do the brain. It's a good exercise. The critical piece, though, is you need to develop a process on how to do it. If you just do it randomly and try to guess, it's okay, it's fun, but you're really not changing your brain. If you can develop a process, start with all one number, then another. If you follow the same process every time, you'll find that the variables that you don't know will decrease significantly. The key then with any type of brain training, again, it's analog, right? Using eyes, ears, if you say it out loud, if you're holding it using your hands, those kind of connections, then if you try to apply it to the other parts of your life, can be powerful. Now, here's another myth. The myth that it's just as good to read on a Kindle or an iPad as is a real book. Again, that's not true. In fact, studies show that you won't remember what you're reading as well. The reason is, again, it's a digital connection, right? So you're looking at the screen. There aren't even really page numbers because they depend on the size of the font. If you try to remember something, you just search for it, right? So the device is doing all your mental work. When you hold a real book, you got to balance it, right? You got to turn the pages. You have to use your mind. Let's see, what was that guy's name? Was it 3 pages back, halfway down, right? You're constantly dialing in your brain to the information, so you're making it work much harder. And that's basically a principle that people can remember is any time that you offload mental work to a device, it's easier, but your brain's not getting the work. right? It's like driving to the store as opposed to walking. It's a lot faster, but it's not very good for your health, right? So the more that you can engage your brain, the better. And in fact, when I teach my classes a lot, what I try to get people to keep in the back of their mind is go do hard things, right? The harder things that you do, you're working your body and you're working your brain. If something becomes easy, you need to step out of that comfort zone and stretch it a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. Something else that I've heard is that the brain stops maturing at the age of 25, or you're kind of just like, once you turn 25, then you're kind of just set in stone. Can you speak to
Yeah, actually our brains change till the day we die, which is very encouraging. Now what happens as we get older, a lot of things happen. One of the things, if you ask a 20-year-old make a decision, they'll say yes or no pretty quickly, right? You ask a 60-year-old, well, it depends, right? It doesn't mean that they're thinking slower. Basically, it's just they have so much more information of lifetime of experiences to filter through to get to the answer. So our brains do change till the day we die, which is very encouraging. The other thing very encouraging though is our brains will change around damage. So if you give your brain a task that it needs to do and makes these connections, if there is physical damage like from concussions or Alzheimer's or CTE, your brain can actually wire around that to get what it needs to. So that's how the symptoms can be overcome of physical damage.
Awesome. That's super promising, especially for CTE, because that's something that's definitely affecting a lot of athletes right now.
Right.
That's huge. That's super huge.
Right. Very encouraging.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. What are some things that you think people should know about neuroplasticity or executive function that may change their worldview or their belief and allow them to actually make changes in their life, where they might be saying mantras or using visualization but not really getting the results that they want to get? How would you maybe address that through neuroplasticity and executive function?
That's a good question. I think primarily even just being aware of it. So if you want to do better, a wild example, right? So if you have some big meetings coming up at work, right? And you decide to binge watch Netflix for 3 days beforehand, right? That's what your brain's going to be thinking about, right? Is what you just, because data's coming in, you're thinking about it, what's going to happen, your brain is changing physically based on the inputs, right? As opposed to maybe studying up on what the meeting's about, studying what your opponent, whatever information you can gather, writing, and actually saying out loud is very powerful. A lot of research lately that if you want to remember something, speak it out loud. It activates a different part of your brain. In fact, the more parts of the brain that you simultaneously engage, the deeper the ruts and the better you'll remember. We all have those experiences where we hear some music, remember where we were 20 years ago, right? That's because our brains imprint everything that's happening. So the more parts of your brain you can engage, the more powerful that will be, and the better we will be at remembering it. So that's the main thing. The other thing, habits. In fact, there's 2 ways we recommend people try to change habits. And so, 1, it's encouraging that you can change habits, but 2, it's useful to have a couple ways to do that. And there's probably many others. The 2 we recommend, 1 is to replace that habit, what we now call a zombie system, with another one. So for example, and I actually had clients do this. If your kids, or maybe you, have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, right? Monday morning goes up and you have trouble getting out of bed. Well, what do most people typically do? The alarm goes off, what do? They hit the snooze button. They do that 3 or 4 times until they can't wait anymore. Well, what's the zombie system you're creating? The alarm goes off, you're not teaching yourself to get out of bed, you're teaching it to turn off the alarm. So that's the zombie system that you've created. So you need to replace that. So we recommend on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon, when you don't have to be anywhere, you crawl in the bed, get really comfortable, set your alarm for 2 minutes, and as soon as it goes off, you consciously do what you want to do. So you get out of bed, maybe make the bed, go towards the bathroom, okay? You're conscious right now, right? do it again, do it again, do it again. Every 2 minutes, you get out of bed. What happens eventually is you start to lull yourself, you start to get relaxed, and eventually it starts to become almost unconscious. So after 5, 6, or 7 times, that's all you need. Monday morning, your alarm goes off. That's the first thing you're going to want to do. Now you can still consciously override it, like maybe it's Saturday and you don't really need to get up, right? But you've now created a zombie system to get out of bed. Another way is to insert a zombie system in front of another one. And the example we use for this is kind of serious for kids, especially younger people. They text and drive. Text and driving is very dangerous, right? But it's nothing that can be consciously overcome. I mean, when I pay my cell phone bill, there's a sign that comes up and says, take the pledge. So I'm sitting here in the comfort of my home, nothing's going, no distractions. I can take the pledge, I'm not going to text and drive. But what happens when I'm driving? Especially for younger people, because they're answering so many texts all the time, the zombie system they've created is to look at their phone whenever that notification goes off. So if you can talk to them and say, look, the next time notification goes off, just count to 10. Your friends can wait 10 seconds, you can wait 10 seconds, it's not that big a deal, right? And so if they can insert that count to 10 before they look, when it's happening 100 times a day, when they're driving and the text goes off and they've now start to count to 10, that opens a conscious window where they can say, hey, you know what? Maybe I better not answer that right now. Maybe I better pull over first, or maybe I better get in another lane or do something safer, because you've actually inserted that window before the zombie system. So that's 2 ways we recommend having. You can apply that to anything.
Yeah.
Apply that to eating dessert. Apply that to whatever you want. You can replace it with another one, or you can insert one in its place. So, but then again, that's all neuroplasticity, right? We're creating taking a conscious process and making it unconscious by deepening those ruts along the process we want to follow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially, conditioning is basically the brain not having a choice to follow a system or process.
Right.
And when you interrupt that conditioning with a 10-second pause, you allow for a second option. You
Right.
put a fork in the road,
Right.
literally in the neurons probably.
Yes. Right.
And then you have the option to choose a different path.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And that
Exactly.
totally can be applied to anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.